across the sea of life, so much pain, warring divides. It's a shame we don't see how it can be. Oh, we need to smile at each other, wish for your brother, help one another. All we need.
Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you all.
All we need to honor our mother, shelter our sisters, all to existence. God's help will come from above, but first we need the love.
Another Thursday and another episode of The Y Factor. Welcome, listeners. Today is Thursday, the 7th of July, and Tasnim, welcome to the studio yet again.
Thank you, Miran. Today we have a very action-packed episode. In terms of news, both locally and internationally, there's a lot going on. And inshallah, the rest of the episode, we have a few very interesting interviews and surprises, so make sure you stay tuned. But for our first local event, obviously the Muslim community in Australia has been getting a lot of hype in the last week due to various events. Just this morning, it was reported that Bilal Kazal, who was actually accused of producing a terrorism handbook, was actually granted bail by the New South Wales Supreme Court after actually spending 3 years in jail. And it was found that the judge had actually given improper directions to the jury, and as a result, his conviction was actually quashed, which means, it was found to be invalid.
So he got off on a technicality. Is he going to be charged again?
Well, he's on bail now, so he's awaiting for his next trial, and the bail conditions are actually very, very strict, and they require like $400,000 as a surety and issues like that. But basically this has created a lot of hype about media sensationalism and a person being on trial before they're actually on trial, like
trial by media.
That's right.
Trial by court.
That's right, because he is accused at the moment, and he was actually a former airport baggage handler with Qantas, and apparently he's been charged with producing this 110-page handbook for terrorists or whatever. So it's a sticky issue, but he's actually on bail at the moment.
Well, he's not the only Muslim or Muslim issue to have been in the media over the past few weeks. At the moment, there's the burqa bill,
definitely,
which requires identification of your face if you wear the burqa when a police officer asks you to. So basically, just for identification purposes. I think the scholars released a press release.
The Islamic Council and the Imams Council of New South Wales actually got together and issued a press release saying that if it is for security reasons, then Islamically it is allowed. But they were saying basically that, obviously try to have a female officer do it, but if worse comes to worse, then you can't. But with the new law, it's a $5,500 fine or 1 year in jail if it is found that the person is not cooperating with the police. And trying to obstruct justice, and this is with the hoo-ha. It's because these are in traffic conditions. Before, that was airport security and stuff. With these new powers granted to the police, it's basically in if you're just driving down the road and the police stop you, they actually have the power now to ask you to unveil.
Well, clearly this all came in the aftermath of the Carnita Matthews incident. I'm not really sure what most people think about this. I think from what we've gauged so far, people seem to think that it's it's all right if the scholars think it's okay and it's just for identification purposes.
I don't think there was ever a problem with the scholars not thinking it's okay for security reasons. I mean, even overseas, like in Iran, Saudi, these countries,
sure, but that's for airport security.
That's right.
We're talking about the whole traffic incident as well. Personally, I think it's reasonable, but I don't wear a niqab. If you do and you have a different opinion, please let us know on our Facebook page, which as always is The Y Factor Radio Show.
The Y Factor.
Now, just 2 days ago, SMH covered this news item of a Western Australian farmer that had to shoot 3,000 of his cattle because of the live export ban to Indonesia. And it was the article went on to say how this is having a really, really depressing effect on Australian farmers because of the ban, and how now they're basically stuck with either a quote was actually, "These aren't mince or sheep. These are 400 or 500 kilos lumps of dead cow." And basically it was just, the mental impact of this live export ban on farmers. So just this morning, it was actually revealed that the federal government has actually lifted the ban on live cattle exports to Indonesia, but they said there's more strict requirements that the the suppliers actually have to have welfare standards and things like that.
Which is fair enough. That's pretty reasonable. You know, do you remember a few years ago when that whole incident occurred with the Australian farmers sending a shipload of sheep to Saudi Arabia, and then they returned it because the sheep were in very poor condition. They were all squeezed onto the ship, and then there was this big hoo-ha about like banning exports to there as well. I just think that people sort of just keep rising on the whole animal welfare issue, and while I personally think that animal welfare is very important, and also from an Islamic perspective, obviously you need to care about the animals and all that, but also people tend to neglect the whole idea of what happens to the farmers when this all occurs. So I don't know.
I think the decision definitely needs to look at the economic aspect, but even for Muslims, like you cannot. Like technically, some scholars have said that if an animal is treated in the inhumane manner and is killed as a result, or it suffers as a result, there's even issues if that meat is actually even halal, even if it's slaughtered according to.
So that's contested, even.
That's right, you know. So as Muslims, you know, it's not an issue of, you know, we don't want animal rights or whatever. But I think this is a very heightened issue because it involves, as you said, political, economic, and social issues, and it happens that in this case it's also religious. So there's many facets that need to be considered when making such important decisions.
Well, interestingly enough, despite the fact that this is having such a great economical impact, people were still very negative in their responses when the ban was lifted, and they were just sort of like, oh, well, what's the point of making a comment on animal welfare if you're just going to continue sending the animals to a place where we have been told they're not going to be treated well.
But I think the message has come, like, especially to Indonesia, the standards have been lifted. So I know it's not, you know, perfect, but like honestly, what are you going to do? Like, for example, this farmer with the 3,000 cows, get the cows killed? Or like, I understand from both sides of the debate, it's very interesting. And our listeners out there, if you do have, you know, some views on this, let us know your thoughts, because it is a very important issue.
Yeah, except that I think what happened was they lifted the ban on live exports, and what a lot of people wanted was to just send the meat over after it's been killed or slaughtered.
Yeah, but I remember I don't know what council it was that deals with these abattoir issues and stuff. They're like, we don't have the facilities in Australia at the moment to, especially immediately, like for example, these 3,000 cows that need to be shot.
Yes.
Because he was saying, I can't afford to have them grazed on the land because that the grazing is for other cows, etc.
Yeah.
Within 2-3 months, you can't set up abattoirs and like the facilities to process these meats. Does that make sense? Like, that's obviously a long-term solution, but short-term solution, what are you going to do? It's kind of like, you know, the worst of
two evils.
Yeah, so, you know, something to look into.
The Y Factor.
Former Defence Force personnel have spoken about the whole Tampa and children overboard issue in the Howard government days, and have accused the Howard government of manipulating events for political purposes.
Just to refresh your minds, with the Tampa affair, it was the boat full of over 400 asylum seekers that did come to Australia, and what the Howard government did, they actually got the SAS to go on and treated it like a military operation. And it's actually really interesting because the former second in command of the SAS counter-terrorism squad, and he's actually a Labor MP now, Peter Tinley, he actually said that sending the SAS was an overreaction, and it was only resonating politically the border security messages. So it wasn't, you know, an issue of you know, what these asylum seekers actually were presenting a threat to Australia. Right. It was a very, you know, political football situation at that time.
As always. When it comes to refugee issues.
Now, the other issue, which was most important, was the actually children overboard. I don't know if you guys remember, but they had images of like these asylum seekers chucking their own children overboard, you know, attempt to get sympathy and things like that. And it actually turned out later to be absolutely fabricated. There were no children overboard, and those pictures were, by Australian media turned out to be actually fake. So the former head of the military public affairs brigadier, Gary, has actually said that asylum seekers were never a threat to Australia in the first place. And as a package, the Tampa crisis with the children overboard affair were just packaged by the Howard government at that time to sensationalise and, you know, present.
Well, it's Liberal policy. There's no surprises there.
The Y Factor.
Well, in the spirit of all the revolutions that have been going on, Sudan's bid for independence has been overshadowed for a while, but now south of Sudan is applying for independence with the UN.
That's like in this month or so, and it's really interesting because Palestine was going to apply for United Nations status in September, so we'll see.
Well, Palestine is a country on its own, whereas south of Sudan is a tiny piece.
I think it's very politically heated at the moment, and there's a lot of comments being chucked back and forth. If anyone is from that region, because I think there's a lot of history, culture, politics involved, let us know on Facebook your thoughts on this. Now, in a piece of unfortunate news, 30 people have actually been reported dead in India, and they were in a bus and they were actually on their way to a wedding, and the bus was struck by a train at a level crossing near Delhi, and the train actually dragged the bus 500 meters down the track.
Ouch.
And 31 people died.
The wedding that turned into a funeral.
It's very, very sad, and may God have mercy on their souls.
Well, while we're still overseas, Syria is not letting up. There's been a massacre in Hama, 16 dead in 48 hours, and most people are fearing a repeat of the previous president Hafez al-Assad's massacres in the same region.
That's right, and the news coming out of Syria is just
relentlessly
That's right,
violent.
mind-boggling, and it seems to be him and Gaddafi are competing for who can kill the most.
Speaking of Gaddafi,
he's still there. He's still there. So we honestly hope and pray for both countries that the violence and the bloodshed can
and
stop.
Yemen and all the other countries suffering from the same problems, which are not getting as much media coverage at the moment as they were in the beginning of the year when it was new.
That's right. That's right.
The Y Factor.
And speaking of Palestine, tomorrow, Friday the 8th of July, hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists are planning to fly to Tel Aviv's airport in a display of solidarity with Palestinians. The Palestinians are conducting peaceful protests, and these people, 500 people bought tickets, and 15 organisations. Basically, all these people are planning to go there and join them in these protests. And I've heard that there's a flotilla almost there as well. So
that's right. It's actually interesting because the Israeli public security minister called these activists hooligans, and he basically said they won't be allowed in. And I think the reason why they're actually catching planes there is because some of these activists were saying we're so sick of pretending like we're there to go on pilgrimage or we're there to visit family. We are there in solidarity and in support of Palestinians and their rights. So we'll see. I just honestly hope it doesn't turn into another, the
flotilla
affair with the ADF coming in, but we'll see how that goes.
The Y Factor.
In Spain, judges are actually investigating hundreds of charges of child infants being abducted and sold for adoption over a 40-year period, which began in the rule of Franco, 1936 to 1939 during the Civil War. And apparently what happened is they used to actually use these tactics of abducting the children of the leftist parties and stuff, but it actually turned into like a trafficking business, and it involved doctors, nurses, and even nuns. Now at the moment there are thousands of cases before the judiciary investigating these claims, and it's really heartbreaking because one of the stories had a family actually had 2 children which were abducted for political purposes. So we'll see how that goes and keep an eye out for news coming out of Spain.
They still have their protests going on in Spain for freedom, for more democracy. I think they're a relatively new democracy, which not many people know about.
I think, with the dictatorship of Francisco Franco, it's recent history. I think people just forget the country has gone through the bloody civil war to get to where they are now, and now they're just having time to look back and investigate what actually happened.
Yep.
The Y Factor.
Our final international story for the week is one that I found particularly amusing. 33 women from Kuwait are filing for divorce against their husbands because, not that they're dissatisfied or they had arguments or whatever. Their husbands tell them they're going to go do Umrah in Mecca, and they ended up discovering that all 33 of their husbands have been partying in Beirut instead of doing Umrah in Mecca.
You're kidding me, right?
No, dead serious. They actually filed for divorce in court and everything. It's official.
That's like triple deception. Not only are they not going Hajj, number 2, they're going to Beirut, and number 3, they just, oh my God.
Can you just imagine them packing their ihram clothes and putting on a holy front and, who wants me to make dua for them while I'm there, and then just the minute they land in Beirut airport, it's clubbing time.
The Y Factor.
Now for some wacky news items this week.
A man tried to set fire to a petrol station because it was out of sausage rolls. A court has been told. This happened in a Caltex service station in Brisbane.
Mind you, the guy's 40 years old. It's not like he's some juvenile kid that was starving.
Yeah, he actually left the shop after they told him they didn't have sausage rolls, and he he spilt petrol on the ground, and then he tried to light it up with a cigarette lighter, but he was unsuccessful, and then they arrested him right after. But seriously, that is a lot.
Okay, no, he must have been on something, because the article is saying that he actually intended to cause grievous bodily harm, and he was actually charged with possessing cannabis.
And he has a history of alcohol and drug abuse.
So maybe when people are on cannabis, they like sausage rolls. Addiction, maybe? Any medical doctors or ex-cannabis abusers?
Ooh, let's hope not.
The Y Factor.
Our next wacky story is out of England, where a West London neighbourhood had a woman evicted for her karaoke sessions, which were apparently a bit too loud for her neighbourhood to handle.
Wow.
She received an official warning of eviction in November for singing specifically certain songs by Tina Turner, and then the neighbours asked her to give her some peace. She kept going, couldn't give up on her karaoke dreams, and is now about to be evicted.
Maybe the neighbours were like Muslims or something, and it was Ramadan and they just couldn't handle.
No, apparently even the non-Muslims couldn't handle it, so maybe she really was too much.
Maybe she just had a bad voice. Well, that brings us to the end of the news segment for this week.
Stick around. We're going to take a very short break, and then after that, dive right into our jam-packed episode. We're going to be talking to a Muslim author from Sydney with a new book to tell us about.
And we'll also be speaking to Uthman Badr, the HT spokesperson, about the Khilafah conference and the controversy surrounding that.
So stick around. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
Poor girl, you're so beautiful, you know. It's a shame that you cover up your beauty so. She just smiles and graciously responds reassuringly. This beauty that I have is just a simple part of me. This body that I have, no stranger has a right to see. These long clothes, the shawl I wear, ensure my modesty. Faith is more essential than fashion, wouldn't you agree? This hijab, this mark of piety, is an act of faith, a symbol for all the world to see. A simple cloth to preserve her dignity. So lift the veil from your heart to see the heart of purity. They tell her, girl, don't you know this is the West and you are free. You don't need to be oppressed, ashamed of your femininity. She just shakes her head and she speaks so assuredly. See the billboards and the magazines that line the checkout aisles with their phony painted faces and their airbrushed smiles. Well, their sheer clothes and low-cut gowns, they are really not for me. You call it freedom, and I call it anarchy. In this hijab, this mark of piety, is an act of faith, a symbol for all the world to see.
Welcome back to the Y Factor, listeners, and joining us today is someone who's spent the last few years travelling around the Middle East, and now her well-worn travel shoes have landed her back on the shores of Sydney with a brand new book. Welcome to the show, Raidah Shah Idil.
Thank you, Miran. It's good to be back.
It's good to have you here. So tell us a little bit about where you've been over the past few years and some of your best experiences while you were gone.
Okay, so basically I landed in Jordan, I think it was June 24th, 2009. And the first image I had of that whole country was, why there's so many posters of the king everywhere? It's coming from Australia, where it's like a democracy and politics is a very different story. It was like, wow, this is cool. And then, so basically I stayed most of my almost 2 years in Jordan. And common day occurrences were seeing sheep being herded from one side and they're put to the other. In Jordan, completely normal. I was shocked the first few times, and you quickly get over it. And subhanAllah, I really miss hearing the adhan. Like I really, really miss the adhan. Because I mean, being born in Singapore, very secular, moved to Sydney, very Western. I'd never had a chance to actually experience, a way of life where it's actually normal to be Muslim. So it was actually nice to feel that. But the funny thing was, though, when we were transiting from Sydney to Abu Dhabi, I was telling my brother how exciting, we're finally going to be like everybody else, and because we all wear hijab and kufis. And then when we landed in Abu Dhabi, people were staring at us because we were Asian. So that's when I realized, you know what?
From one stereotype
exactly, we're never going to fit in. Alhamdulillah. So yeah, so that was really interesting.
And does that tagline fit in with your book?
Exactly. So I think I had never felt more Malay than by actually living in Jordan with a neighborhood of Westerners from all over the world. And culturally, like, we do come from a very Malay background, but we weren't really raised as such. It was more, like being a Muslim comes first, and like many of us in this society. But when you actually feel like a minority in a minority, I think you start missing nostalgic things like the food, mum's food. I really miss my mum's food when I was overseas. Like the language. For example, there were a few Indonesians in the community I lived in, so I made sure I would sort of like mangle my Malay enough to make it sound, passable. And it was nice. It was nice to feel that connectedness because I felt very different, even though we were all united by Islam. I definitely believe there is a place for culture in our religion. I know there's often this down with culture, Islam comes first, and I agree with that. But Allah in His mercy and His wisdom revealed Islam to Rasulullah SAW, and it was spread all over the world, and it's sort of intertwined with culture in many beautiful ways. For example, in Malay culture, you need to have absolute respect of your elders, like 110%, and that's very Islamic. You never like point with your foot, you never point with your toe, for example. It's just crazy. No one does that. And again, that's very Islamic. You're not supposed to show bad adab like that, right? And so it's the same thing. So I felt that by being in Jordan and, being very different, but at the same time being very Muslim, everybody else, it created this dynamic where I really missed home, but I also really appreciated where I was. So then the last leg of my stay, after I came back from Hajj, I wrote this book. And I remember the height of my missing my family happened when I came back from Hajj, me and my brother, and we arrived in Queen Alia Airport in Jordan. And that during that moment you expect to see your mom, like your brothers and sisters, like familiar
landing
faces.
in an airport.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're like, oh, okay, I guess they're not here. Alhamdulillah. So I mean, you just have to roll the punches, but that really made me appreciate being back in family and home. Okay. So that's the book, really, like nostalgia.
So now you're officially an author online with Finding Jamilah. So tell us a little bit about Finding Jamilah, and you published it about 2 months ago?
Yes. So Finding Jamilah is a story about Jamilah. She's a young Australian Muslim woman. She's half Malay and she's half Australian, so having an identity crisis has been an ongoing, thing for her. And, something really big happens to her family. And this, as many things, happens to be the case, like this big difficulty is a catalyst for her making a journey back to her mother's homeland, Malaysia, and she learns many, many things about herself. So I guess this book is something that I wrote in many ways as a response to what's currently out there when it comes to fiction about young Muslim women. So I'm really tired of the, trapped behind the harem bars, or, the angry behind the burqa, or the I raging against my religion type of story. Because by and large, from what I know of myself and my friends, none of us fall into that category. We're happy, we're with our families, we love our faith. Islam gives us direction and guidance, and it helps us when we're actually in trouble. So I wanted to offer an alternative to what's out there in the market. I mean, it may not be as controversial because everyone loves the, bash the Muslim story and all kinds of other negative stuff, but it's like, no, Islam is beautiful and I've seen it work. I've actually lived in a society, excuse me, I've lived in a society where people would stop their work and just answer the call to the adhan, like en masse. And that was really beautiful. And this is what we were called to earth for, to worship Allah. So by seeing that, I think that increased the certainty in my heart, and then that transferred, to my book.
So your character is Muslim, living in a Western society, but she's not at conflict with her faith, just with her cultural identity.
Exactly. So her faith is what keeps everything together, basically. From a start to finish of the book. This is, she turns to Allah through her difficulty, through her hardship, which is what we all do as well. And yes, identity is a tricky one for many of us as well, because that's our external presentation to the world, where this question, are you Australian or are you Muslim, is constantly being asked in the media. It could be implicit, it could be explicit, depending on the latest, late-breaking, horrible news story. But, my answer is, why can't you be both? What's the big deal? We're here. Most of us live law-abiding lives. You want to go to uni, you want to come back, you want to go to work, come back, be with your family, and contribute to the world in a positive way.
Was a book about marriage, or you just touched on love?
No, the book was not about marriage. Okay. The ultimate question.
Female feminist line.
No. It was a story, I guess, about. I deliberately did not want to tackle that topic because that would open up a whole other can of worms. Maybe like book 2 or something. But it's a book about family and having love from your family and your friends and being content with that. I think that's the message I want to send to my young female readers as well. It's like, you do not need a man to complete you. And by having this mentality of codependency, you're setting yourself up for abuse, for being taken advantage of. It's more like marriage will come when Allah sends it to you, when you're a happy, whole person who's worshipping Him independent of any man. Allah did not, bring you on this earth to be married, believe it or not. He actually said, I have not created man and jinn except to worship me. And this is something that we can do in every sphere of your life, whether or not you're single, married, divorced, widowed, with children, or without. So Jamilah, in this case, is a young Muslim woman who lives with her family and, is worshipping Allah through that.
That is a very well put argument, and it reminds me of the series of articles you've been writing for Muslim Village since you got back. Also about marriage and why it's not necessary to complete one's life. But I think you've been kicking up quite a storm with the comments on your articles. So tell us a little bit about that and what inspired you to write on the topic.
Okay, gladly. So basically, I found that when I came back from this amazing trip, but I'd seen so many things, and not only had I been to Jordan, I'd visited Syria and Egypt, and I'd been on Hajj, subhanAllah, something I thought I'd take a much longer time to end up going. But the first question some people would ask me, people who barely knew me, for example, would be like, "Oh, are you married yet?" And I was like, okay, maybe this is a one-off thing. Okay, never mind. Let it slide. Don't worry about it. It's okay. They just kept happening. So I decided to write about it, So I guess the point of my article says that, obviously, who doesn't want to get married? Like, it's a normal human thing. Otherwise, the human race would cease to exist. It's sunnah. It's a good, healthy thing. But if it's not happening, believe me, it's not by lack of trying on anybody that I know. It's just purely nasib. It's destiny. And the hardest thing about destiny is acceptance. Because as human beings, we like doing things. We like, the whole, I am the master of my ship and that type of thing. But it's like, no, you're not. Allah is. So what we can do instead is make peace with the reality Allah has placed you in. So my articles, aligned along the lines of reminding you that Allah is the one in charge. And my articles offer solutions for where you are in this present time, whether or not you're married, divorced, single, or whatnot. And I really, particularly to our young Muslim women out there, because as far as I know, could be biased, I do not hear people sort of nagging men, why aren't you married yet?
Oh, definitely. It's always been more of a women
That's the thing. And it's like, I understand the whole, biological clock ticking factor, and it's just like,
I tend to feel it's more of a cultural pressure than the biological clock.
It might be, like, perhaps it's intertwined, because maybe this is another article we need to write. Why is there so much sort of emphasis? I mean, all the educated young Muslim women that I know who aren't married yet, they do want to marry, like, good men. This is the defining factor. I do not believe it's a good idea to settle for the first guy who comes knocking at your door, because you're worth more than that. A happy marriage is a slice of Jannah on this earth, and you can have a good partnership and, raise wonderful children together and then have a good legacy. However, an unhappy one it's a slice of hell on earth too, and it's not a good thing, because you don't want to be in a relationship where it takes you away from Allah because you despair in His mercy. So my argument is, it's okay to want to marry, it's totally fine, you know, but like, be discerning. You know, be like Khadija, Radwanha, like our mother Khadija, who married the best of creation, and she was very discerning. She knew her worth, and when she saw, you know, someone amazing like, you know, her soon-to-be husband, that's when she decided, you know, he will be the one for me, inshallah.
I think all this marriage talk is making Mohamed back away.
Yeah, I'll leave you to it. So.
I mean, I'm not trying to scare anyone here. I mean, seriously, a healthy dialogue is important.
Of course.
You know, and it's, you know, and alhamdulillah, I have brothers, I love them very much, you know, and they're very much in this Muslim community. And I'm not trying to man bash. And this is a problem with, it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be, you know, go woman and then down with men. Because Islam's about balance. It's about addressing the issues from men and women. Because I happen to be a woman, I can only write from that perspective. I can try to be empathetic and so on. But no one really understands your reality unless you're living it. So, you know, if there's any, you know, young men out there who want to step up and write, then go ahead, you know, because this is important to get dialogue going. And like, you know, there's so much, you know, knowledge out there and lots of bright young people, and it's time to just network, you know, put it out there.
Well, I really like that you're towing the very moderate feminist line, you know, not man bashing like you said, and not strongly pro-female, but I guess like our religion tells us, moderation is always key.
Always.
So, sorry, just bringing it back to Finding Jamilah, your book, where can one purchase it, find a copy?
So basically, if you go on the Amazon Kindle store, you can type in Finding Jamilah, and Jamilah is spelled Jamilah, and you'll find it come up on the search bar. Or you type my name in alternatively, and they'll come up as well. Some
of the reviews online mention the fact that there's a surprise ending at the end of the book.
Yes, there is.
Are you willing to reveal anything at all? Or
no.
would you rather people purchase it?
Read the book. Because, you know, I would like to think that my readers establish a rapport with the characters in my story, which is why the ending was such a surprise. So if I tell you what happened, you'll be like, oh, okay.
No, let's just leave it as a surprise for our listeners as well.
Right.
So it's not actually out on paperback or hardback yet?
No, it's not. I don't think it's reached that point yet. I'd like to keep marketing it online because I guess it's, you know, technology is moving forward, and although I do enjoy the feel of a paperback or hardback book in my hands, I thought I'd give it a go to see how it would be online. And I like how it's able to actually reach people in the US. Because when I went to Jordan, I made many friends all over the world, like from Guyana to America to the United Kingdom. You know, even from Norway. So there's a huge world out there, guys. You know, and it's full of really interesting people.
And ebooks are definitely the way forward as well. I mean, most books are being transferred to ebooks. So.
I agree with you, yeah. So there you go.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming in today, Raidah. And good luck with the future of your sequels, hopefully, and even more books to come. And we'll be keeping track of your articles on Muslim Village.
Thank you.
Listeners, if you'd like to check out more, be sure to look up Finding Jamilah on Amazon, and do check out the articles we mentioned on Muslim Village. They're really interesting. And let us know what you think. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to The Y Factor on 87.6 FM.
This would be if we all open our eyes to see He is all that we need right now, and we can all come together somewhere, somehow. His door is open no matter who you are. Just take the first step, you'll see it's not so far. Down this road that holds all the answers. Open your heart to something greater. His holy book speaks pure and true, and always tells us what we must do. His last prophet was sent as a guide, an example by which we abide. There is salvation for those who seek to find the one and only source of peace, and understanding of why we are here, who created us, who we must fear. So what a wonderful world this would be if we all open our eyes to see He is all that we need right now, and we can all come together somewhere, somehow.
Factor.
Welcome back to the program, guys. Today we have with us media representative of Hizb ut-Tahrir, Uthman Badr. Welcome to the program.
Thanks, Mohamed.
Hizb ut-Tahrir has been labelled radical Islamist organisations. There have been calls to have, HT banned from the country. How do you react to these claims?
Oh, well, we understand. Assalamu alaikum. We understand that some of the views that we express are quite strong, and they're about key important issues in which we want to engage in debate. It's unfortunate that from the other side, particularly in terms of some elements of the media and the politicians, are more interested in labels like extremists and radical and moderates. For us, we're not really concerned about these labels. We get to the core of the issue. We find that the situation in the Muslim world is quite dire, and we seek to change that. And we find that Western governments are playing a negative role in that respect. So that's the context in which all this occurs. And we're more than happy to discuss really with anyone about that.
Just wanted to link it back to what you were saying about the negative labels given to Hizb ut-Tahrir. Are you not concerned about the negative effect of labels and that kind of discourse amongst the wider Muslim community? I mean, you mentioned the media and politicians, but what about the Muslim society and how they view HT?
Well, certainly we're concerned if there's a negative conception. But what I meant before was there will always be some sectors of society, the media and the politicians, who will not seek to engage in the ideas, and they're just going to label regardless of what you say. In the Muslim community, obviously, we have, as everyone understands, a spectrum of opinion on any issue. And if there is a negative conception there, certainly we are concerned about that, and we're more than happy to engage in discussion to clarify our positions, to hear what other people have to say, and to have that discussion to see whether there is common ground that we can come on. And if not, then certainly Islam doesn't condemn difference of opinion, as long as we understand that in an atmosphere of brotherhood and Islam, that there can be a room for difference of opinion, but at the end of the day, we're all working for the same objective overall. Just
to clarify, can you tell us a little bit about Hizb ut-Tahrir? What the purpose is, how you function as an organisation?
Okay, I thought that would be the first question. In brief, Hizb ut-Tahrir is a global Islamic movement that works to re-establish or to resume the Islamic way of life in the Muslim world. And what we mean by that is that if you look to the Muslim world, whether it be Egypt or Pakistan or Saudi Arabia, we find systems and ideologies implemented that are anything but Islam. There's monarchies, there's democracies, there's secular regimes, there's some autocratic regimes, but we don't find the system that the Quran and Sunnah require to be there. So we understand that you cannot implement Islam in its totality, in its comprehensively, without having an authority to actually do that, as we saw in the case of the Prophet ﷺ and the four Khilafah Rashidin after him. So we work to reestablish the state as a means, not an end, as a means to live a wholly Islamic life in that part of the world. And of course that means that it's in a globalized world, it's a global effort, and wherever Muslims exist, our members naturally, as a consequence of being Muslims, exist, and we all contribute to that effort as a whole.
So is your work directed in Australia itself or the Middle East? Because I think there's a perception amongst Muslims themselves that say there's no point trying to establish Sharia law in this country.
Yeah, well, obviously, as I said, establishing the Sharia law, establishing the Caliphate for us is in the Muslim world. It would be a bit putting the sock on the wrong foot if you don't have Sharia law over there, but you want to have it over here. So certainly, we don't work to change the political framework in this country as Hizb ut-Tahrir. But that doesn't mean that there's no work here that for the end over there. And you find this is the thing that is across the board. When there's Chinese repression in Tibet, there's protests here in Sydney and in London and in the United States, because public opinion, the work of politics is built on public opinion. And in a global world where there's barriers are very small, and you've got social networking and you've got global media, then you can play a very big role regardless of where you are. And of course, more important than that, we find that one of the greatest obstacles to change in the Muslim world are Western governments, because you find the Muslim governments are, by and large, puppets or proxies of these regimes. So if you're here or in the UK or in America, you can account these regimes, you can bring that discussion in the public discourse in this country and appeal to the sincere people in this country to say, look, there is oppression in the Muslim world. We're working to change that, but your government is playing a very negative role there as well, and we appreciate that you don't agree with that either. So what can we do about this? So there's a number of factors that we can play, even though we live here, that will contribute to the work over there. All
this is the aftermath of the conference you had, the annual conference you have every year, but you had it last Sunday, I believe, at Lidcombe, Westella, and the theme was the uprisings in the Middle East. Do you want to tell us a little bit about the purpose of the conference?
Yeah, sure. Well, we do have the conference or a major event around this time of the year, and I might mention why this time of the year, because it's relevant for Muslims in particular. It's during the Rajab period, the Rajab which comes a couple of months before Ramadan. And that's because the Khilafah was destroyed in the month of Rajab 1342 Hijri. So it's usually a commemoration of that destruction, not in the sense of lamenting over what's happened, but in the sense of recognizing that there's an obligation that still needs to be fulfilled. So every year on some topical issue, some important issue, we'll choose a theme and have that discussion connected to the issue of the Khilafah. So this year, it was obviously difficult to go beyond what we've seen take place in the Muslim world. You know, millions of people coming out onto the streets to face the tyrants that exist over there. So we thought there are some burning questions in the minds of the community, in the minds of non-Muslims as well. Are these uprisings genuine? Is it the people? Is America behind this? Is it allowed in Islam to have protests like this and go against the ruler? So the point was to have this conference, discuss these uprisings from all the various angles that are pertinent, and to understand what's happening, so that we can then go on to think about, well, what role can we play in this struggle for Islam in the Muslim world, given our context here in Australia.
So it's more of a taking a background and learning for the future kind of thing, because the way the advertising campaign ran, it sort of seemed as though Hizb ut-Tahrir might have been taking slight credit with perhaps their branches overseas for the uprisings.
No, not at all. Not at all. It was more a case of, this is what's taken place, this is what we can see of the broad facts on the ground, people coming out, there's civil war in Libya, there's civil strife in Yemen, in Syria, there's all this repression taking place. Egypt and Tunisia, we've seen some level of change. What does it all mean? What's actually taking place? And where does it fit in the work to actually have Islamic changes as opposed to any other forms of changes, and what we can do from here? I mean, I think people who attended the conference would say there was very little about what we actually did in the uprising. Certainly our branches obviously have played a role, but there wasn't, that was certainly not the focus. We look at it as we're part of the Ummah, and the Ummah has moved here, but we want to be able to understand how we can direct into the direction that Islam requires, as opposed to moving away and really being hijacked by Western governments.
In a lot of these discussions, the idea of democracy and whether democracy is acceptable from an Islamic perspective comes up. So because we've established a lot of this is an issue of semantics, what is democracy?
Okay, well, when we talk about democracy, I think there's a need to distinguish between the popular understanding and the actual technical understanding in political science, or the Western understanding, if you will. What I mean by popular understanding is that most people, Muslim or non-Muslim, will understand democracy to be elections, voting, representative government, accountability, and therefore it's a good thing. However, in its actual understanding in political philosophy, in its Western understanding, the core of democracy is these things, but the core of democracy is the fact that people are sovereign. Mm-hmm. And because people are sovereign, that is why they have the ability to vote, to account the government, to make sure the government is manifesting their will, and so on and so forth. So the issue is that point in and of itself, it forms the core. And I say the core because the word itself, democracy, comes from the Greek demos kratos, which means the people power, rule of the people. And of course, people ruling in deference to God is unacceptable Islamically. Mm-hmm. So even if you've got the other elements, which I hasten to add, Islam has as well. So the Islamic political system has accountability, representation, and elections are also permissible. But the difference is, the reference point is Allah and not the people. Mm-hmm. So that makes a core difference, which means that democracy is not compatible with Islam. Certainly some people will argue we can shift this element and maybe we can have Islamic democracy, but we look at this as a rather disingenuous approach, because at the end of the day, democracy is a foreign concept. It's a Greek concept, come a Western concept. The Prophet ﷺ came with a system himself, and we should adopt that system instead of looking to modify other systems.
Okay, so you're basically saying that democracy in terms of voting, elections, that kind of representative system has Islamic elements, but the issue with democracy is that it's man-made rather than God-made rules.
Well, kind of. What I'm saying is that democracy, if we look at it, it's got A, B, C, D, E factors, right? It's got all these things that we mentioned, but the core is Islamically unacceptable. So therefore, the others don't make a difference. Okay. It's like any other ideology. I mean, or religion. Christianity believes in God. They believe in prophethood. They believe in revelation. They believe in good manners, right? But you wouldn't say we can have an Islamic Christianity now, because the core is the Trinity, is the belief that Jesus died for our sins. So the problem is, if you ignore the core, certainly you can come up with an idea that, oh, maybe it's Islamic or not. But if you take into account what the essence is, doesn't matter what the other branches mention. It becomes unacceptable.
Just on that, like, there is a misconception amongst non-Muslims, and I try and make them understand that Islam has a comprehensive solution for every facet of life. Right. If we look at, we have a political system, we have a welfare system, a social system, a legal system. Is Hizb ut-Tahrir not an alternative, but I guess an embodiment of the Islamic political system and how it should be? Would you view it as that?
No, not at all, because the Islamic political system is the Khilafah. It's the fact there's a Caliph, there's the Khalifa, he has assistants, he rules by the Quran and Sunnah, there's a certain judicial system, and there's details, obviously. That's not HT. HT is a party that works to establish that, along with the economic and the social and all the others. So we're not an embodiment of the political system. You can say we're an embodiment of the work to implement the political system along with all the other systems as well. But you're right, and I think it's very important that when we speak to non-Muslims, sometimes there's a tendency to restrict Islam only to morals and to say, look, there's morals, there's beliefs, there's the aqidah and so forth. But da'wah can really be taken forward when we bring these aspects into play, because what you find, even non-Muslims are having lots of problems, whether it be globally, poverty, economics, financial crises, climate change. There's lots of issues. Even on a day-to-day basis, you find that the people are not actually happy with the way the government runs and the taxes and the prices and so forth. So if Muslims can come to appreciate the details of, for example, the Islamic economic system, then you allow yourself to have a much more broader discussion with non-Muslims about why Islam would be a better alternative.
Rather than fighting fire with fire, a lot of people suggest that you first find a common ground and then work from there. So what do you say to that?
It depends on the situation, of course, and we should keep in mind here that our example, our role model is the Prophet ﷺ, both in terms of prayer or fasting and in terms of as well of working to re-establish a political authority. So it depends. If the common ground is something that's within the bounds of Islam, then we can do that. But if we're going to end up saying something that is inaccurate or not true, then I think that's where the problem is. The other issue is there is a need for ideological or intellectual clarity here. So, for example, with democracy, if we seek to establish a common ground, I mean, that'd be something like saying, okay, democracy, there's these aspects. We can have Islamic democracy if we do this, and that. But really, if we look at the example of the Prophet ﷺ, there's a need to draw that clear distinction. So this is Islam and this is non-Islam. If you start mixing them around or trying to look for a common ground, you will confuse people's minds. You'll confuse Muslims and non-Muslims. And I would argue that it's more important to clarify for Muslims what something is, instead of saying, well, for them it means X, Y, and Z, and therefore now we should work off this basis. That doesn't mean that you need to be argumentative or opposing in your approach. It just means that in terms of what you say, you need to maintain the clarity of the ideas, and to not mix things around, because in the long term you want the people to come up to the level where they should be instead of you going down, and in the end there will be confusion about, well, before you were saying democracy is fine, now why don't you have a democracy in this caliphate that you've established? And we see this example in the example of the Prophet ﷺ as well, where even where a word was misused, he would stop using it. In the example, for example, with the Jews, where they started using the word ra'ina in the wrong way, so Allah commanded that don't use this word, use another word, even though the word meant fine. It just meant can we have your attention? Can you listen to what we have to say? So it's a deeper discussion. The issue is not so much about whether we can have a common ground or not, but it's about the long term and maintaining the truth as clear from the falsehood.
But sometimes maintaining that same truth does put the larger Muslim community in that whole negative stereotype that the media propagates when a member of Hizb ut-Tahrir is interviewed by the media, which usually does not end very well. So why, firstly, what do you say to that? And secondly, why is it that you continue to engage the media when the outcome is almost always a negative outcome?
Okay, well, I would contend that it's always a negative outcome. It has to be seen in context. But that's a good question. Why would you engage the media? The reason is that, number one, the media is the main form of communication to pass on a message to the wider society. Now, the reality is, of course, whether it be HT or someone else, some other Islamic representative or organisation, or even other issues, the media happens to be sensationalist across the board. And there's obviously, that's a whole discussion as to why that's the case. But what you'll find is, it's not just because you engage that they do this to you. In the last week after the conference, if I can give an example, the worst coverage was on Today Tonight. And Today Tonight actually called me on Sunday night or Monday morning saying, look, we're doing this package, can we have an interview please? And I said, no, sorry, I don't do any recording interviews for Today Tonight or a Current Affair or 60 Minutes. Why? I was very clear. I said, you guys sensationalise everything and you drag Islam through the mud. I don't do it. If you give me an exclusive live interview, I will consider it, right? That they weren't happy to do that. In the end, if anyone who watched that program, they took videos from here, they took video footage from the conference, they took stuff from here, and it was the worst package that you could ever come up with. So the point is, whether you engage or you don't engage, the media is going to move in the direction that it moves. Now, the next question would be, maybe you shouldn't have the conference either. Maybe you shouldn't speak about these issues either. And we end up at a place where either you're silent and you don't raise the important issues at all, or if you do, then this is going to happen. So we find it much more important that these issues have to be raised. There will be a struggle, but you have to engage in it, just as the Prophet ﷺ did. I don't see any difference here where the Prophet ﷺ came out, attacked the wrong concepts of the time, the kufr, the idol worship, and so on and so forth, not looking for common ground between these. And the response was propaganda, was persecution, was torture, it was a huge struggle, and in the end, only through persistence and patience were the Muslims able to succeed. Is your work targeted at average Australians? Our work in this country is more targeted towards Muslims because relevant to the Caliphate, we're not going to get average Australians helping us in that respect, but there is that angle for average Australians through, for example, calling on them to account their governments with respect to their role in the Muslim world. And obviously there will be that broader da'wah work that has to be done as well, because we believe the Caliphate will be established soon, inshallah, in the Muslim world. But the Caliphate is not a state that just within its own borders. It's a state that will herald large degrees of power, and it will seek to be a role model in the world. But it will be established. Sorry, you're aiming to establish in the Muslim world. We're aiming to establish it in the Muslim world, okay. But this will be what in the modern terminology is a superpower that is a role model, and we will seek to establish a new order. To show that the way America goes around the world is exploitative and wrong, and you can do it in a different way. So therefore, you need to have this. I mean, if you establish the Caliphate and non-Muslims don't know what it is, they're going to go off what the media says, and they're going to go, oh my God, we've got terrorists establishing the state. We need to attack them. But if you can work on that public opinion in the meantime and try and counter that by saying, no, the Caliphate, here's the history, look at the history, it's good, the Caliphate's not going to attack, it's XYZ, it's going to be productive, it's going to be a new way, then you will be able to at least win the sincere elements, and that will help you once it's actually established. Uthman Badr, thank you for your time. Jazakallah khairan for coming on today. Wa iyaakum, thanks so much.
The Y Factor.
From the start, a message was sent from above. A message so clear and so true. A message so final for you. The time has come to let the whole world know. This message of peace and love came only from Allah above. Have faith, step onto the cloud of Islam, and you will discover the light of Iman. Proclaim this message entrusted to you, and the cloud of Islam will carry you, you know. For all men, messengers were sent to guide, from Adam to Nuh to Musa, Ibrahim, Ismail, Isa. Then came Muhammad, the last and final messenger, confirming what was said before, perfecting this deen of Allah. Have faith, step onto the cloud of Islam, and you will discover the light of Iman. Proclaim this message entrusted to you, and the cloud of Islam will carry you. I know that it's not always easy to see the difference from right and wrong. What would it be? But people, this message lies here in our hands.
Welcome back to our last segment covering events that are upcoming. Tasnim, our first event is with My Peace, the organisation that we interviewed a few weeks ago with Dia Mohamed and the billboards.
That's right. Well, it seems they're taking it up a notch because they're actually launching, get this, Australia's first ever TV commercial at this dinner. They're also launching...
You mean Muslim TV commercial?
Oh, yeah.
Australia
Sorry,
has
that's
heaps
right.
of TV commercials.
No, yeah, Muslim TV commercial. They're also launching Australia's first most comprehensive survey about Muslims. They will have an exclusive video message by Dr. Mohamed Al-Arifi from Saudi Arabia, and this is so exciting. They're actually going to have a guest performance by Buna Mohamed.
No way. Is he in Australia?
Yeah. Now, Buna Mohamed, if you guys don't know who he is, he's actually a spoken word artist from Canada. Just YouTube him, and mashallah, the guy is amazing. He will be there. Now, it's Friday the 15th of July. It will be at the Conco Dora, Riverwood. It's $75 per head. And to book, brothers, please call 0403 334 535. Sisters, please call 0433 434 768, or you can also visit the website mypeace.com.au/fundraiser. It will be a very, very exciting night, so be sure to be there.
They do also have a Facebook page, just in case you didn't get any of those details down, and we'll put a link up on our page as well, the Y Factor Radio Show. But yeah, if you want to buy a ticket, get in soon for that event. Our next event is with Affinity. They've organised their 9th annual Abrahamic Conference, which will be held this Sunday, the 10th of July, from 4 to 7 p.m. Adults will have to pay $20 door fee and students $10, but you need to RSVP. So you got to call 97020789. It'll be held in the Isabel Menton Theatre in Mary MacKillop Place. So I think if you call that number, they'll give you any details.
And I think it's an interfaith initiative, and they all have like a sheikh, a pastor, and I think
a rabbi
well. There. So definitely something to look at. Our next event is also the Iowa fundraising dinner. It will be Sunday, the 17th of July, from 5:30 to 8:30 p.m. It's $55 per head. It will be at the Emporium Function Centre, 258 South Terrace. They're actually going to have an international speaker from New Zealand, Dr. Rafat Najm, and you need to get tickets from Iowa at ring up 9759-1675. That was 9759-1675.
It's also open to men and women, although there will be segregated seating. It's for the Islamic Women's Welfare Association. They're raising money for their new
premises.
Centre.
Yep.
Okay, our next event is the Harun Yahya Tours of Sydney, which will be held on several days, the 26th through to the 29th of July, inshallah. They've got several lectures about atheism, the miracles of the Quran, the creation of man. Unfortunately, Harun Yahya himself will not be coming to Australia, but I think it's his students who are
staging the conference. That's right.
They'll be held in the LMA Youth Centre, the Auburn Town Hall, USYD, UNSW and UWS Parramatta. So if you'd like more information about that, they have a Facebook event or
we'll actually post it on the Y Factor page. So have a look there if you are interested in the Harun Yahya events.
Yep.
Our last event for this week is actually by ISRA. They're having a lecture entitled Jihad and Crusades, Friday the 22nd of July 2011 from 6:30 to 9 p.m. at the ISRA Centre.
Actually, that's 7:30 to 9 p.m. and ISRA is located on level 3, 123 to 136 South Parade, Auburn. They do want you to register your interest either online at the email info@isra.org.au, or you could call 9649 9040, and that will basically be a discussion between Dr. William Emerson, a Christian theologian, and Mohamed Ozab.
No, but it's interesting because the theologian is actually discussing jihad and Mehmet will be discussing the crusade, so they've done a swap.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so that's something to look into. That's the Friday the 22nd of July.
Well, there's certainly a lot of events coming up, so if you know of any further events, please feel free to post them up on our Y Factor page. If you have anything else you'd like to let us know, again, please post it up on our Y Factor page, Facebook page, or you could send us an email at yfactor@live.com.au. But I think that pretty much brings us to the very end of our episode today.
Yep. From Tasnim here, Miran and Mohamed in absentee, would like to wish you an awesome week and would like to hear from you on our Y Factor page.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
You must get up, love. I'm a blessing from God, so why you don't use me more? It's so odd. You need love, we need love. Love is all we need. Love is all we need. All we need is love.